Hello guys, today we'll be continuing with our studies on system units. Before we before we go into the main content, please note that data in this context does not mean raw facts. It actually means electrical signals that are represented by bits, zeros and ones. At the end of this lesson, it's expected that you should be able to explain what processors are, what memories are. You should be able to distinguish between ROM and RAM, and also you should be able to explain what disk drive is. Processor. Processor is a small rectangular device that is located on the motherboard and functions to handle the arithmetic and logic operations of the computer. These arithmetic and logic operations is the major processing function of the computer. But to meet the large scale or amount of data that should be processed, processors usually have millions of integrated circuits to help with their processing task. Also, the processor performs control function through its control unit. These days, processors are usually called microprocessors due to the level of VLSI technology used to manufacture them. VLSI stands for Very Large Scale Integration. It actually means that several chips, several ICs are actually being put together to make one chipset. One chipset. Now, this chipset is what we call the processor because it is what gives the processor that quality to be able to handle data as zeros and ones. So the technology used to produce a chipset is a very unique technology, and these chipsets are made with chemical elements that are semiconductors. They tend to know when to go up and when to go down, so that we have series of zeros and ones that represent data. Note that the mathematical function is the major processing function of the computer. Let me explain this part. Now, what the processor does is simply to add out numbers in a logical manner. Remember, it is an electronic machine, okay, that works on data, and data in this context is actually zeros and ones to the computer. So when the computer picks this thing, the only thing it does is just to add them up, just to add and add and add and add, and then when it adds, it generates some bytes, and then sometimes some kilobytes, and sometimes it generate just files. It keeps generating stuff, and that is the processing of the computer. That is the major work of the that's the major processing job of the computer. So the operating system is a software for the processor and its RAM. Operating system is the software of the computer. The actual software that processes data, that helps the processor to process data, because the processor cannot do anything on its own. Okay, instructions must be loaded on top of it, and data must pass through those instructions to be processed. So the operating system is the major software that has been installed on a computer, on a processor, that processes data and also to control the hardware. Now, notice that we just talked about how the processor also controls the computer through its control unit. Okay, the processor also controls the computer using a particular aspect of its chipset that has been called the control unit. Examples of processors are Intel Pentium series, Intel Core series, Intel Celeron series. For example, in the Intel Pentiums, we have Intel Pentium M, we have Intel Pentium 4. In the Intel Core series, we have the Intel Core i2, Core i3, Core i4, Core i5, Core i6, up to Core i7. And then we also have the Intel Celeron series. The specifications of a typical processor. Now, for us to know how powerful or how capable a processor can be, there are basically two specifications that we have to look out for. Number one is actually the clock rate, the speed, and this is usually measured in gigahertz. It's usually measured in gigahertz. So we can have something like 1.5 gigahertz or 2.5 gigahertz or 3.5 gigahertz. The larger the number, the larger the value, the more faster the processor is or can be. Number two is the processing size. Can it take up to 32 bits at one time, or does it take only 8 bits? So if it processes only 8 bits at a particular instant, then that means it's going to be slow. It will not be able to handle so many tasks at the same time. Note that 8 bits is just one data. It's only one character. So a computer that is 8 bit that processes 8 bit is very, very slow computer. So, but we have 32 bits computers, and then we have 64-bit computers. These are processing size of processors. Memory. The computer has two primary memories. Basically, the random access memory and the read-only memory. Okay, note that storage devices are also called memory, although they are considered to be what? Secondary memory. The RAM. The full meaning of RAM is random access memory. It is the major computer memory that is used by the computer during processing. It communicates with the operating system on the processor's chipset and with the hard disk. So the RAM does a very funny job. One of the jobs it does is this: as soon as the computer starts and then the processor starts working with the OS, with the operating system. So the RAM acts basically as the plate. Let's just say it's the plate for the processor, as the place where all the things that have to be worked on stay on. Okay, so if you have a very small if you have a small RAM, it means your computer also will be slow. Why? Because if your processor is very powerful and then your RAM cannot hold so much data at an instant, then the computer will will also be slow. The read-only memory. The read-only memory, ROM, is one of the computer's primary memories and serve the hardwired instructions that the computer uses when it boots up before the system software loads. Okay, so when we say hardwired instructions, we're talking about the programs, the codes that were written by the engineers, the manufacturers of the motherboard. You know, the ROM is actually comes together with the board. It's an aspect of the board that you don't touch. It actually contains the booting informations. Okay, it actually has a part of it that is called the BIOS, BIOS, which stands for Basic Input Output Software. So this ROM contains codes, programs that were pre-installed by the manufacturers to just help the computer boot up and load the OS from the hard drive, and then place it on the RAM so that the computer can start running. So note that ROM and RAM are together called the memory of the computer, as opposed to the hard disks and peripheral storage devices. Yes, so when you see the ROM and the RAM, we usually call them memory of the computer. We don't usually call the hard disk memory, although it is called secondary memory, but in its sense and its way of function, it is actually a storage device. It is actually a storage device because it holds the files for a longer time. So it's more or less a permanent storage. It is not just a memory where you go to work from. Storage section. So the storage section of the system unit comprises basically of the hard disk. It comprises of the hard disk device. Basically, the hard disk device is the major device in the system unit that stores. Apart from the hard disk, there is no other device um, inside of the system, inside of the tour, that stores up data. This is the main storage device of the computer system. Although peripheral storage devices can be connected to the system by means of its cards. This is the main storage device of the computer system. Although peripheral storage devices can be connected to the system by means of their ports, we can also connect other storage devices. Examples of other storage devices are memory cards. We also have, apart from memory card, we also have external hard drives. We also have CDs. So the hard disk is an electromechanical data storage device that uses magnetic storage to store and retrieve digital data using one or more rigid, rapidly rotating platters coated with magnetic material. The platters are paired with magnetic heads. Are you confused? Well, the working operation of the hard disk is a very complex topic and it's much big for you now. So just relax. Don't think about it now. You get to learn to understand it, how it operates, and later in your studies in advanced physics. Specifications of a hard disk. Now, basically, the specifications to watch out for when buying a hard disk is its storage capacity. And this storage capacity is measured in megabytes, in bytes, okay? In bytes, but we have sizes of it, which is, it can be megabyte, could be gigabyte, or terabyte. Summarily, in this video, we have learned about what processors are. We also have successfully contrasted between ROM and RAM. Okay, and if you remember, I told you that ROM is a read-only memory. It contains the pre-installed information that that the engineers who manufactured the computer have actually installed, so that it could tell how the computer should boot. Now, for the RAM, we said that the RAM is actually the card that handles information temporarily. Okay, it holds the information while the computer works, while the processor works on them. And finally, we have learned about the major storage devices of the system unit, which is the hard disk drive. Any questions? Ask questions, my little fellows. In our next class, we will be learning about the Home tab in Microsoft Word. And here's an assignment for you. Draw a microprocessor and a tour. On what PCB printed circuit board is the processor fixed? What are the full meanings of RAM and ROM? Thank you very much. Enjoy.